And our second two speakers tonight are both PhD students here in the English department at ISU, and they are both published authors in our Grassroots Writing Research Journal. Our first speaker, Jeff Rients, holds a bachelor's degree in English from the University of Illinois and a master's degree from ISU. In between those two degrees, he worked in banking for 17 years. He is an avid Dungeons & Dragons referee, and his publications in this field include The Miscellaneum of Cinder, Under Xylarthan's Tower, did I get that? Okay. And the forthcoming Broodmother Sky Fortress, as well as contributions to Fight On, Open Game Table, Hecatotoratos.
I'm not even sure how to pronounce that.
Okay. Green Devilface, Crawl, and Encounter. Tonight, Jeff will talk with us about his article that is actually in the current issue of the Grassroots Journal, entitled Chatting in the Workplace, which is co-authored with Irene Taylor, who is also a PhD student here in English. So please welcome Jeff.
Good evening, everybody. First of all, I'd like to note that I'm very sad to be doing this alone. Originally, Irene and I planned on presenting you with sort of a tag team operation, but she could not be with us tonight. So Irene and I were both non-traditional grad students. As was mentioned, I spent 17 years in the field of banking before returning to grad school, and Irene worked here in the English department offices before deciding to pursue a PhD. And so the genesis of our article was basically, let's put that experience to work in sort of a genre studies mode and explore some very particular and obscure genres of writing that we encountered and worked with on a regular basis in the work environment. So Irene selected for the genre that we would explore from her field the work order, the little slips of paper that you fill out if you need something scanned so that you can distribute it to your students, or if you need something photocopied, or those sorts of tasks. In banking, my primary job was, until I got out of it, was collecting mortgages. So yes, that's okay. There's a reason I got out of it. So the instrument I chose was the breach of mortgage notice, which is this lovely letter that I would have to send anytime somebody went 3 payments past due, advising them that legally, if nothing changes here, we may start the foreclosure process. And so it was a critical document that I used on a all too regular basis. We each picked one of these, and then the idea would be, since the other person was not an expert in this field, we could then have a conversation where we would interrogate each other about these two radically different genres and try to learn the sort of activity system in which each of them occurred. So that we didn't come to it totally cold, we charged each other with tracking down copies of those documents, which was very easy for me. I could go to the English department office. I went across the street and got some from the chemistry department, things like that. Poor Irene struggled to find a copy of a breach of mortgage notice online, because it's not the sort of thing that banks like to share, that they even do this sort of thing, right? But she eventually did find a sample breach of mortgage notice that appears alongside of our article. So then the writing of it started very simply as sitting down with a tape recorder and having a conversation on what we discovered and asking each other questions and turning that into a transcript. And then we went through the editorial process and revised and revised and revised. And for me, the most interesting part of this experience was coming from a business background where everything was in nice, neat hierarchies, was having a partner who was equal in the endeavor. There was nobody to make a final call as to, no, we have to do it this way, with the possible exception of her little doggy Joey, who would sometimes break up the meetings by attempting to eat me. He's about as big enough to fit in my pocket, so it rarely worked, but he was very insistent sometimes that I should leave. During the editorial process, there was a stage in the operation, and I think this goes back to the fact that there was nobody calling the shots. We were trying to do this on a consensus basis, where we sort of went wildly off track, and we had this editorial feedback, and it's like, well, maybe the article should be about dealing with things like editorial feedback, or what if your boss says there's something wrong with the document, or things like that. And it became highly meta, and the editors of the journal talked us off the ledge on that one, which I thought was very useful, and we got back to some very practical issues that we dealt with. However, seeing as tonight's talk is not subject to editorial oversight, barring a rush from the back of the room or something like that, we decided that we would talk through some of these issues in a sort of meta way as our presentation tonight. And so I have here a little manuscript that we put together where Irene writes a paragraph and then I wrote a paragraph in response back and forth for just a few pages. So here's beginning with Irene. We're here to talk about the article Chatting in the Workplace. Catchy title. One that never crossed my mind when I first approached Jeff with my idea about an article focusing on genre studies in the workplace. First, let me talk briefly about my background in composition. I grew up in an education system that argued for structured writing, 2 points off for each grammatical and spelling error, clearly defined topic sentences in each paragraph, smooth transitions, thorough research, and diligent citation of all sources, and of course, an introduction that tells the reader what you are going to say, a body that says it, and a conclusion that states what you just said. Yes, I am a product of the 5-paragraph essay. I was lucky, I survived, I found a way to transfer those skills to the workplace. Fortunately for students today, the educational system is moving forward finally. They don't have to rely on luck. We're giving them insights about the writing process, as well as the skills to use those insights effectively. So now it's my turn. I'm a product of a similar education system, and while the writing instruction I received in high school prepared me for success in pursuit of my undergrad degree, when I entered the workplace after college, I discovered that the writing skills that served me well in earning my English degree only got me so far in other situations. In fact, and this is a story I have told all my composition students, I was nearly fired early in my first career over my first 2 attempts to write a perfectly ordinary business memo because I turned in English papers instead of memos. Back to Irene. When the English 402 class of fall of 2012 was given the assignment to write an article for possible submission to the journal, I was quite excited. But then, being my first semester as a full-time graduate student after 20 years in the workforce, a reading on Ginsberg's Rethinking the Digital Age was equally exciting. But I digress. As I learned more about genre studies and the resistance that was coming from what I call the traditionalists in the field, I thought, why not talk about the application of this approach to situations outside the academic environment? What I proposed to Jeff was that we take our experiences in the workplace to show what the tools students are given in the English 101 classroom can and indeed will be needed once you leave academia. My response to her: I am not a fan of the concept of a sharp divide between academia and the real world. Of course, it suggests that real work doesn't happen in places like where we are today. Personally, I've never worked harder in my life than in grad school, and my first wage-paying job was literally shoveling manure on a pig farm. Additionally, this real-world, school world binary obscures the intellectually rigorous work done by many people outside the bounds of educational institutions, as well as erasing academia's role in the maintenance of the larger capitalist system. However, it is obvious that many of our students believe that they are working in one universe in preparation for life in another, as I once did at their age. And perhaps we can be forgiven for granting this relatively minor point, even as we attempt to undermine it through arguing for the wide applicability of the writing program's genre studies/chat model. How many times have we heard, Irene says, either as an instructor or as a student, why are we doing this? What does this have to do with a writing class? I don't understand, this doesn't make any sense. Guess what? In the workplace, you don't have to understand. You just have to do the job and do it well. That's what I wanted us to articulate, that in the workplace, you're expected to come in with the skills to communicate your ideas effectively in whatever genre is given to you. So we met, turned on the recorder, talked about our respective jobs, transcribed that conversation, and came up with what we thought was a kick-ass article on writing in the workplace. My initial understanding of the article was that two people with experience in writing in the workplace would interrogate each other on their specific experience with specific genres. And the published draft still places emphasis on Irene and the genre of the work order in conversation with me and the genre of the breach of mortgage notice. But what started as a straightforward dialogue in a genre studies mode ended up going through several iterations under two pressures. Our own developing understanding of what we were trying to do, and the guidance of our editors. Irene puts that as, that was when we were introduced to the genre of the, quote, article submitted for publication, unquote. Okay, perhaps it's more a process than a genre, a frustrating, spirit-crushing, what the hell did I get myself into, why don't you see what we see and appreciate it for its brilliance process. But it worked. The meetings, the feedbacks, the revisions, this is the last time we do this proclamations proved worth the time. For in the end, we, and if I may be so bold as to speak for Jeff and myself, discovered what was right before our eyes the entire time. This article was about more than arguing for the genre studies approach to composition. This was about how the theory behind genre studies presents itself in the most non-academic of environments, the office space. This was about chat. The process of turning our initial transcript into a publishable article was a bit of a slog over several major revisions. Time and time again, we fell back on the words of a veteran radio producer who had outlived several changes in staff and ownership at his station. Quote, life's a marathon, not a sprint, unquote. So although more than once we swore to ourselves in packs of blood that this was the absolutely last draft we were going to tackle, each new set of editor feedback led to a new round of revisions. Irene's epiphany late in the process that we had always been writing an article that highlighted cultural historical activity theory gave us a much needed second wind. That combined with the editor's high tolerance for our widely divergent drafts eventually got us across the finish line. Returning to Irene. Following the guidance provided by the editorial staff of the Grassroots Writing Journal, we went back and reworked the piece. Well, in this case it was probably more I, learned lessons about the genre of article as dialogue. First of all, it doesn't have to be verbatim. One is allowed to edit a discussion to reflect a particular topic, since that doesn't happen, or at least seldom happens, through impromptu discussions. What does happen is that careful examination of a discussion may reveal a thread that one may not recognize at first glance. In our case, the thread resulted in all the components found in cultural historical activity theory. And I do mean all. Production, representation, distribution, reception, socialization, activity, and ecology. It's all there. I think back to those two terrible memos that almost cost me my first banking gig, and the lessons of chat come shining through. My representation of the genre of the memo was unconsciously relying on inappropriate antecedent genres. I was entirely ignorant of the activity system with which the genre of the memo functions, nor was I aware of how widely a memo can quickly be distributed through a business. You may have heard the old saying, don't write anything you wouldn't want your grandma to hear read aloud in church. My motto for memos quickly became, don't write anything you wouldn't want the CEO to read aloud at the annual shareholders meeting. If nothing else, I hope in some small way that Irene and I have managed to write a piece that highlights the hidden complexities of writing in even ordinary workaday settings. And Irene finishes with, it is here that I will hand over the presentation to Jeff, who will attempt to answer your questions. Thanks, Irene. I wish I could be with you. Thank you.